to our session on building a culture of trust, how to develop strong engineering, product, and design partnerships. Just to kick things off, I'll introduce myself. My name is Rosie Fan, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Miro. And with me, I have a couple of great people from Pivotal. So we have with us Aloka, Shanfan, and Matthew, who are respectively part of the product, design, and engineering teams at Pivotal. So I'll pass things over to Aloka to kick off our introductions. Aloka.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Aloka. I'm a Director of Product at Pivotal. I've been in tech building products for about a dozen years now, mostly in XP, actually all in XP Agile. So I have a lot to say around that and talking about working with cross-functional teams.
Matthew.
Hi, I'm Matthew Horan. I'm an engineering lead here at Pivotal. I've been here for 6.5 out of the last 7.5 or so years. I sought out Pivotal after working at a whole bunch of startups with terrible practices and sought out Pivotal for XP and pairing and all the stuff that we'll talk a little bit about today and how our teams are very effective in working together.
And Shanfan.
Hello, my name is Shanfan. I'm a design lead here at Pivotal. I have worked in the field of design and specifically software design in the past 10 years. And yeah, always enjoyed close collaborations in small teams and always enjoyed working with product managers and engineers all together.
Great, thanks for those introductions. Now I'm going to do a quick bit of housekeeping and then we'll kind of dive into the session. So just a couple of quick housekeeping items. The first thing is that right now your default view may be set up to speaker view. So if you do have the chance, please go up to your view options, and then if you click on that menu there, you can go to your side-by-side view. You'll want to do that so you can see the screen that we're screen sharing as well as all of the speakers side by side. And one of the other things to note is that you can actually toggle the size of the screen share versus the size of the speaker views, so feel free to adjust to whatever feels comfortable. You might also know that there is some movement going on this Miro board that we're sharing. That's because we're doing some live scribing right now, so you'll actually be able to see a member of our team taking notes as we get the discussion going. Next thing I want to share quickly is that we do have an active Slack community. So if we do have the chance, we'll try to save about 10 minutes at the end for any questions. So right at about 1:40, we'll try to wrap up our discussion and get some questions in. If we can't get to everybody's questions, I highly encourage you all to go to our Slack community and join our AMA channel and then share your questions for our awesome speakers in that channel. So we'll do that, and then lastly, all of our sessions are recorded, so if you don't have, or if someone on your team hasn't had the chance to join our session today, just know that all of our sessions will be recorded and shared. With that, we'll go ahead and kind of kick things off. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Pivotal. Aloka, do you want to give us a quick introduction on Pivotal as a company and how your teams are organized?
Yeah, so Pivotal has been practicing Agile XP since the late 1980s, 1990. Pivotal Labs as a company has been around since then, and we've been a larger umbrella of Pivotal for since 2012. And one of the big things we pride ourselves about, and also is part of our business model, is the way we build software. So Pivotal Labs is a consulting firm that works with customers to help transform the way they build product, they build software. And core to how we think about building product is how we work cross-functionally between product design and engineering. And we believe that having close collaboration, and not just as a way of providing feedback, but as a way of co-creating across functions, is what enables strong product being built. And a lot of this comes from the, I think, the core assumption that we've moved from a world where things were changing less frequently to a place where things are changing every day. And as we have startups disrupting how we build software and what kind of value is being brought to market, it becomes more and more important that these functions are working close together versus the old waterfall way where you're doing a handoff from like requirements from the business to like, this is how we're going to build it, which happens with design and PM, and then a handoff to engineering of like, okay, go build this thing. And then 6 months later, something's in the market. Like that does not work anymore. So as we move away from that and towards iterating how we build and really iterating based off of customer feedback and user research, it becomes more and more critical for us to work together as a unit. And so the way we organize ourselves at Pivotal is we have 100% dedicated product teams. And that means that every member of the team is 100% dedicated to working towards the outcomes that that team's driving. And part of that team is typically a product manager, 1 or 2 designers, and engineering. And we have engineers pair program and do XP. So we think of our product team as a unit that consists primarily of those functions. And then we can also think about what it looks like to have a broader community when you think about marketing and sales and customer success and how they might plug into the team to make the team successful overall.
And one of the things where I'd like to kind of kick us off is around this topic of why cross-functional collaboration is so hard. So Aloka, you talked a little bit about how teams are structured at Pivotal, and it's a way that makes a lot of sense. But maybe Shanfan or Matthew, one of you can tell us a little bit about why is it so important to build trust amongst product teams and engineering teams and the design teams? And how does it make a difference that Pivotal is such a global company with so many offices around the world?
Yeah, I'm hearing that you have several questions stacked up there. How about we just start with why is it so important to build trust across function? I think that we all come from certain trainings and certain discipline. And when we work with people from the same function, it's familiar. We know how we think. We have this same pattern of working. So it is much easier when we just encounter someone from the same function than just automatically have that baseline understanding for each other. And it is easier to build trust with that baseline understanding. Whereas when we start to interact with the people from other functions, a lot of times it's like speaking to a foreigner, like you don't necessarily understand their culture, the jargon they're using, the process, the thinking process, the mental model they're following. So it is hard to build trust with someone from a different function, just like it is hard to immediately build trust with someone foreign. And as we have seen, though, like Aloka mentioned earlier, if we want to build top-notch software and really have this product being able to cater to different business needs, customer needs, and fulfill the engineering feasibility requirements, you really need people from all different functions to understand each other and work together in order to build a product like that. So I think it is very important to build trust with cross-function, even though it is hard to begin with. Matt?
Yeah, I started off my career the types of environments that Aloka was kind of alluding to at the beginning, which was, not so agile, rather waterfall, a lot of big design up front. And typically these organizations were structured in a way that, product and design lived somewhere else and did a bunch of ideating ahead of time. Maybe there were even outside firms that came up with the ideas that we were going to build. And, they kind of threw that over the wall to the engineering team, who then worked in isolation on what they were building. And, that never really seemed to me like the most effective way to build software, to build a product. That's ultimately what drove me to come to Pivotal and embrace our process. And very early on, I started at Pivotal Labs, which is an agile consultancy, and I worked with a client where they had been working that same way. They had been had product teams that did a bunch of work and then told the engineering teams what to do. And we taught this team, we taught specifically one of these engineers that, if you are working on something and you have a question about it, maybe you could go and ask the product manager what they actually want you to build. And that was a really, I think, a highlight of that engagement with that client, because not only did we transform this individual's experience with their company, where they now actually enjoyed their job, they actually became far more effective at getting their work done, because instead of just coding up the wrong thing and shipping it and finding out years later or months later that it was completely the wrong thing, we get those faster feedback loops. And so that trust is really important, because when you can trust, when you have a team where you have that trust and you can ask a question without fear of repercussions, right? No one's going to say, oh, you're dumb for not knowing that. Then that leads to high performing teams, which is what I set out to build on the engineering side.
Yeah, we talk a lot at Pivotal about psychological safety in teams, right? I think Google has also talked about high performing Project Olympus, where the pattern they've seen of high performing teams are teams where there is a lot of psychological safety. And the hypothesis there is, when you have high trust and high psychological safety, then people are more comfortable about being uncomfortable and taking risks and feeling like the team will back them up in taking those risks and having those experiments, coming up with experiments. And that leads to learning-oriented teams. And that's where innovation comes from, is when people are striving for learning versus hanging back in safety to just build what they're being asked to build. And so that sort of psychological safety not just happens within one function, but within the unit that needs to make progress and build something interesting and valuable for the market.
So I think the natural next question that a lot of our viewers might be asking then is, how do you build trust? So let's talk a little bit about how you do that with your teams and cross-functionally. Maybe each of you can share some of the rituals or norms or practices that you engage in, both inside your team and cross-functionally, to make sure that as a cross-functional team, you're working as a unit and you build that psychological safety.
Well, I can start it off. So one of our core practices here, and in general, this is, I think, something that's really important to XP and Agile, are retrospectives. And so, we have weekly retrospectives that involve everybody on the team, including all of the functions. So it's not just engineers talking about their engineering challenges. We invite the designers and product managers to that retro as well, so that there is a space to bring up the challenges that the team is facing. Now, in order for that meeting to be effective, you have to, as Aloka alluded to, have a high degree of psychological safety. So that's something separately that we've invested in. All of the leadership in terms of product engineering and design have been running these psychological safety workshops with our teams, as well as something called a team health assessment. These are all separate from the weekly retrospectives that provide the team with that high cadence opportunity to talk about challenges. And the team health assessment is a way to, on a quarterly basis, take a look at, you know, what's going well, what's not going well, what should we keep doing, what should we start doing, what should we stop doing.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we do is a lot of, Shanfan talked about this, you're kind of, you know, it's like working with a foreigner or getting to know a foreigner where you are thinking differently. So we do a lot of things that help us build empathy with other functions. So we talked about a little bit about pairing between engineers, but we have a lot of pairing across functions as well. And what that tends to look like is when we're doing problem discovery, where that's primarily driven by design, we have product managers and engineers also chime in on what are the learning goals, sit in on interviews, sit in on and collaborate on synthesis. So we start learning each other's toolkits a little bit in a broad sense, not deeply. You know, any day, even though I've sat in on research and I've learned and can do research today, I'm never gonna say I'm as good as someone who's actually studied it for a career, right? But what I do have a sense of now is what are the challenges of doing research. And similarly, when it moves from problem discovery to solution ideation, we do design studios, which is also cross-functional. And what design studios is we have engineering, product, and design go into a room, take paper, and just sketch things out to visualize what we're thinking, we're hearing, and what a solution might look like, and then validate that. And so every step along the way of problem discovery, solution, ideation, validation, and finally solution execution, there's always a mix of cross-functional partnership as we're going through these steps. And the value that we get out of a lot of this is, at the end of the day, a lot of the micro decisions that are happening day to day, everyone has enough context where they can make these micro decisions, and therefore it doesn't require any one person to always be there to answer questions, right? Everyone understands where we're coming from and what the customer really is looking for. So in my mind, that is a huge aspect of when you talk about rituals on a lot of these sessions that we have where we have cross-functional brainstorming and ideation. That's part of every part of the process.
And I would like to add that feedback is also a very important part of Pivotal culture. Almost everyone, when they joined the company, we're going to have constantly, we're going to teach new hires about how to provide kind and actionable and considerate feedback to people, and how to receive feedback. That's number one. And also, a lot of times, yes, the managers collect feedbacks for their reports on a very regular basis. At the same time, all the teams who work together day to day, they also invent their own ways of giving feedback. There are constantly new innovations on how a team decided to do their feedback sessions. For an example, the team I am on recently just started to do this like quarterly feedback for each other. So let's say like the four of us work in the same team. I'm going to collect feedback for Rosie, and Rosie is going to collect feedback for Matt. Matt is going to collect feedback for Aloka. And then so as I collect feedback for Rosie, I need to go to Matt and Aloka to ask for all the all the feedback you have for Rosie, and then I will synthesize that feedback for Rosie and deliver that feedback for you. And through this process, it's not only practiced how we collect and synthesize and deliver feedback, it really also created a lot of humility amongst the team members, because now we started to see, oh, this is how we interact, and this is how each one of us can improve so that we can become an even more productive team.
I'd like to add too that, you know, all these rituals are great, but it's also really important to have some fun. And we have a budget, like our company, we sponsor monthly events for the team. So each team is able to do whatever they want to do within like a certain budget. And so what this leads to is stuff like people have gone to escape rooms, or like what axe throwing, and you know, people get creative about what they want to do with that budget. Maybe they get swag instead. And so there is a lot of what ends up happening is people become friends, and through these things we're also very specific about who we hire, and we hire for empathy, and we hire for people who can collaborate, and that is part of our interview process. So like while there are team rituals, there are also these like foundational things that the company supports that allows for people to build relationships and really want to, you know, the best case scenario is you're going into work and you're working with your friends, and you enjoy going into work because you're working with your friends, right? So how do you enable that within your team, and as a company, as a team, is really important as well.
Great, thanks for sharing that, everybody. What about distributed teams? So all of these rituals, including having fun, kind of going out and celebrating together, are great for teams that may be working together on site. Do you use some similar rituals for distributed teams, or do you kind of supplement with some different rituals? Maybe each of you can touch upon that.
Have a quick ad for fun activities that my team has done. So my team is completely distributed, and the time when we released our first alpha product, we felt that we have to celebrate it, but we didn't have time to come to co-located. So we just carved out a half day of that week to play online games together. And we just played games as a team online for half a day.
Cool, that's awesome. Shanfan, it would be great if you could share what some of those online games are in our AMA channel afterwards.
Yeah.
Matthew, Aloka, any other rituals that you might add on for distributed teams that you're working with?
Yeah, I will say that we've had all the stuff that I talked about with regards to design studios and all that stuff, right? We do very similar things irrespective of whether we're co-located or distributed as it relates to that. It's just the toolkit that we use. And that's when tech gets really, really important, right? Like having, I feel like only in the past year have I started to rely on my video conferences not freezing every 5 minutes. I feel like Zoom has definitely been the most reliable experience I've had. I also feel like, and I swear this is not, I haven't been asked to endorse Miro, but it's definitely something that has changed the way we collaborate remotely in a distributed way, because it makes brainstorming and ideation a lot easier. And so I do feel like the industry is moving towards enabling distributed and remote work a lot more, which has led to it becoming easier for us to keep a lot of the, build a lot of these same types of connections and information sharing, even though the teams are distributed. In addition to that, I think no matter how much you try, building trust and everything as a distributed team, co-location is critical. So part of what we do as Pivotal does as a company is we leave budget. If you are a distributed team, normally what ends up happening is that everyone co-locates once every 6 weeks or something. That they decide on what the cadence is, but we do make room for co-location to build those connections that may be much harder to do when you're remote or distributed, because a lot of I think how you build trust is nonverbal and body language. And it's hard for that to come across if you're over the phone or on video chat. And so that's part of, I think, what helps make distributed work for us.
Yeah, I will say, I think, as Aloka alluded to, the tooling has just gotten so much better here in the last few years. And just to kind of provide some perspective, when Pivotal started working on what is now the Pivotal platform, or Cloud Foundry, it was decided that everybody who's going to work on that product would be co-located. Everyone was going to be in the Pivotal headquarters in San Francisco. And at the time, sure, there was Hangouts, video calls, and WebEx or what have you, but the tooling just wasn't great, and the call would drop all the time. We couldn't really have great remote pairing. Pairing was important to us. The tooling just wasn't there, and like almost every call I hop on now with a peer in another office, we're on Miro, we're talking on Slack, we're just collaborating together to a degree that wasn't possible years ago. And this has really changed how we say yes or no to whether or not a team can be remote. In the last few years, we probably would have said no if a team wanted to be in a different office or somebody wanted to work remotely. Now we're far more open to that. So the technology, as the board is saying here, technology and tooling matters, right? It's really important to have the tooling and the tech that makes it possible to be remote.
I'd like to add to that, there is some aspect of this where you need to have a mindset of being inclusive and making intentional about making sure that the people who are not in the office are being included and are getting the same voice as everybody else, right? And that's been a journey for us. We started off with what I think one of the big things, a shift I've seen is we started off with, we have meeting rooms, everyone's in a meeting room, and then there'll be a couple of people remote that dial in. And what we start to realize is the people who are dialing in don't necessarily have the same platform because they're not able to jump in the conversation in the same way as people who are in the room physically. And so now, for the most part, what you will see is if the team is distributed, all meetings are fully distributed. And what that means is everybody dials in from their desk, even though they're sitting right next to each other for the majority of the group. And that also leads to a lot of these things, which might seem small, but is important, is invest in good tech, right? Everyone in our office has gaming headsets. You can see Shanfan and Matt have them. Those things cost $200 a set or something like that. They're not cheap. But the value long-term that it provides of being more open to getting onto a call when you know it's not going to be painful is just incalculable.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that. Let's move on to a slightly different topic then. So this is about building trust, but what happens when there is no trust there or trust is broken, how do you go about repairing those relationships? So maybe you can all share some tips on how you can turn around and rebuild trust for a relationship that's gone off track.
I think, oh, go ahead, Aloka.
Oh, I was going to share an experience that I had on a team. I think the interesting thing for me in my journey has been at Pivotal, there's a lot more structure and similarity of what it means to work with engineering, but less so with product design. And so what I realized over time is every time I work with a designer, there's a lot of like, okay, how do you work? And how do you work? And how do we make sure that we're really having those conversations on what are our working agreements? And I have this, I think my second experience, the second time working with a product designer at Pivotal, I had all these assumptions in my head of like, this is how I work with design, because I like had the experience and made those like working agreements with one designer. And then I came in and was like, it was completely different and I wasn't sure what was happening. And I was like, maybe she doesn't trust me. Like maybe she doesn't think I know what I'm doing. And the way I ended up working through that is using some of the rituals that were mentioned here, right? Which is like retros and feedback. And so we started off with doing a product and design retro regularly. And that sort of led to this very like easy and safe space to talk about what like questions and things that are confusing and starting to sort those things out and build the working agreement slowly. And I've used that since then. Every time I feel like something's missing or there's a disconnect, and like, hey, let's do a retro, let's do a pair retro and see how we're feeling. And that generally tends to create space for conversation, but also build trust when you go in with an open mindset, and also you feel the other person coming in with an open mindset as well.
Yeah, I think like Aloka said, there are tools to rebuild the trust, but I think the most important thing is the company culture needs to support that. I think at Pivotal we talk a lot about always assume the best intention, even if there is frictions in your interaction with a colleague. So and it is so natural that we're all different people with different background, and we are going to step over each other every now and then. And I think the trust could be damaged most of the time is like when you're not talking about it. It's like when you bumped into each other, and then but somehow like if you just harbor that emotion and never had a chance to talk it through. But having venues like retrospection, we actually also like have budgets for people just to grab coffee with each other randomly. And it's like very easy in a company where like you don't have to have like a very formal reason. You could just say, hey, so-and-so, can we just go take a walk together in the park? And then like having those culture that supports this kind of behavior so that you can actually work through these misunderstanding or misstepping into each other. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and not to sugarcoat everything, I think there is always the reality that, you know, sometimes you might not be able to get yourself out of the bind that you've gotten yourself into. And in that case, you know, fortunately, we're a large enough company where we can usually work through those challenges, move people around on teams, find a spot where somebody might be happier working with others. But I think the key here is having that open and honest communication. The most important thing is that reports feel comfortable talking with their managers and raising the challenges that they might be having. If you don't have that trust, then you're not going to be able to get yourself out of any bind. And so I think just being able to talk with each other at every level, both cross-discipline and then between the manager and individual contributor layer is really important. Otherwise, I don't know how you'd be able to fix any of these challenges.
Great, thank you. And Matthew, I think you started touching upon some of the, not so much the tools, but some of the emotional side, the EQ side of managing and creating trust as well. So I do want to hit upon that from kind of the EQ side of the house, less of the tools and maybe less of the tech, but from trying to create that psychological safety on your team. Does any one of you have any thoughts on how you can try to create that kind of trust environment for teams, especially distributed teams?
For me, as you know, an engineering leader, I try to lead by example in this particular case. And so, one of the things that I've always done, particularly when pairing, is show that it's okay not to know everything. I've been working on this product for as long as anybody else has at the company, and I don't know everything, and that's okay. And when I don't know something, I show my pair, I show everyone around me that it's okay to get up and go ask a question. Maybe I reach out on Slack. Maybe it's in the physical location where I am, and I can get up and go and talk with those people. But I don't have to know everything, and I don't know everything. And I feel like it's really important for people, particularly with tenure, who have been around and that people respect, to show that it's okay to ask questions and to not know it all. And that kind of just like you have to apply that to everything, right? So the way that you act in every interaction that you have, it's really important to think about, how will people think based on the reaction that I have to this certain thing.
I've also heard about a few teams that have, during stand-up, each individual on the team expresses how they're feeling that day, right? If they're already like, I'm at 50% today, I'm having a hard week, and I'm unable to show up 100%. And making space for that kind of vulnerability is important to build trust as well. I think that there was a time when there's this distinction between being at work and bringing your personal life to work. And it's like, when you're at work, and you shouldn't have feelings, and you should be a professional, right? And that detracts, in my mind, away from this idea of building trust and safety, because you can't just leave behind the fact that maybe you have a baby at home that had colic and was crying all night, and so you couldn't get a good night's sleep, and you came into work and you're feeling a little cranky. It all is interconnected. So as much as we make it acceptable for people to not always be at 100% and be able to articulate that and be accepted for that, that becomes key, I think, as well, to build trust. And a lot of it does, as Matthew is saying, it does go back to leadership and the company modeling that kind of behavior. I feel really lucky I look at leadership in my group, and they are all people who feel very open and have expressed vulnerability and curiosity and are looking to others for solutions, right? They don't act like people who have all the answers. And that suddenly makes it easier for me to as well show vulnerability. And so, like, having leadership role model that, or people who have been around for a while is incredibly important.
Yeah, +1 on what Aloka and Matt both said. I think when it comes to psychological safety, besides the leaders modeling their behavior, there is also like a create shared understanding and shared vocabulary to talk about certain things. So I think earlier Matthew mentioned about like running psychological safety workshops. That workshop in itself is really not is not going to solve everything, but what that workshop does is to first present the term. There is a thing called psychological safety, and it tells the team why it's important, what are the stories and statistics that supports the importance of psychological safety. So by going through that workshop, people started to think in these terms and think about like why it's important to show vulnerability, why it's important to show to bring your full self to the work, like what Aloka mentioned. And then so next time when there is some like when there is an incident happening that you might feel you didn't feel so safe to raise a question, then you have the vocabulary to say that, hey, guys, I in this situation, I didn't feel emotionally or psychologically safe to raise this problem. Can we talk about it? So it's really just opens up the conversation and helps people to keep each other in check.
Thanks again, Shanfan, Matthew, Aloka, for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rosie, and thanks everyone.
Thanks everybody for joining us.